Oh God, sudden. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome back after 20 years, Nimi and Tim, hence NIMTIM, and just very nice to see you again. I can't believe it's that long. So they're both founding directors of the practice, and I like this from their website. They want to make and talk about architecture in a different way, and here's cheers to that. So thanks so much for coming back. It's really nice to see you both again.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us. Okay, hopefully this will work. Okay, so this is us 20 years ago. We graduated. Wow. Yeah, we met here doing our masters. We were in the same unit. Yeah, oh good. And I'm still probably drinking as much. There's quite a lot of glasses in my hand, but yeah. So this was us from Westminster. So it feels very nostalgic and cyclical to be back here, and we're incredibly touched and grateful to be asked.
I guess we're going to talk about it a little bit through a technical lens, the sort of history of the practice and what we've been doing. So I guess this is where we started 10 years ago, and this is us in our house with when we first set up. One of the first projects we did, which is kind of useful to talk about from a sort of technical aspect, is Yellow House, which we'll come on to the next slide. I guess what we'll try and talk about a bit is we've been doing a lot of small projects, and we've been trying to, for the whole 10 years that we've been practicing, we've been very mindful of building sustainably in every sense, and touching things gently and lightly. And so we're going to kind of look at how we did that at a small scale, which I think requires a different approach and a kind of a simplicity that maybe a lot of the kind of dialogue around building sustainably doesn't always have. And so the first project we're going to talk about is Yellow House.
Yes.
You can talk
Before
about
I go on to Yellow House, I just wanted to say, so we studied here. We then went to work for bigger practices, quite distinguished practices. We didn't really have any idea how to run a practice. We had never really done much client-facing work or writing invoices or writing letters, etc. So we had to learn really, really quickly. And that was daunting, but also on the plus side, it meant that we could create the type of practice that we wanted to. So we could kind of decide, well, this is how we'd like to do it. The first project we got was Yellow House, which were some young clients. They came to us. They just owned the flat, the ground floor flat here, and they wanted to potentially make it into a 2-bed flat. They didn't have a massive budget, but they were creative, and they wanted creative ideas, and they were willing to go on a journey with us, so to trust us. This was their existing kind of layout. It was north-facing at the back. It was a Victorian property, so the rooms were really grand and quite well lit at the front, but really dark and dingy at the back. And we proposed to kind of rethink it and have all the living spaces at the back, put the bedrooms at the front, and have the living spaces open out onto the garden, have it sort of open plan. Because they had such a tight budget, we had to be really creative and think about how we could use materials in maybe a different way, and how we could kind of get a sense of joy and playfulness, but with really minimal intervention. So we opted to use a breeze block, but you can get it in a variety of different finishes, and we went for a really texturized finish. It's not typically used in a domestic environment, but they had some surplus from another big block that they'd done, and they actually wanted to get into using that material in small-scale work, and so they were really forthcoming. They helped us with working out details, and they really wanted to celebrate the block. And you'll see a bit later, they kind of helped us do window reveals and talk about special blocks and get into the real making of the block and its potential. So here you can kind of see around the window reveals, we just wanted the blocks and the glass, and so they sort of said, well, we've got all these specials, you can use all these special blocks. And they helped us and showed us kind of images of the factory of what these blocks look like. And it was a really lovely thing to do with them, and had an element of craft to it. and made it kind of a bit more elevated and a bit more special. The other thing that we did was we worked with a ceramicist. The client knew a ceramicist and was keen to get involved in the project. And so she, along with her ceramicist friend, made all the tiles and glazed them and did the wall. And there was, she sort of, we all kind of went on a journey of what does this wall look like? What are the colours? What's it representing? And it was really nice that they came on board in that way and kind of made their stamp on it. So that was quite a lovely thing that we ended up doing and making in the project.
So yeah, I guess this is about the kind of early years of the practice and how we did a lot of small domestic projects, but we always tried to make them as interesting as we could, and it also kind of helped us evolve a thought process and an approach to projects that has kind of allowed, which we've kind of taken forward into bigger, more complex projects, which is about kind of, you know, how do we reflect, you know, the values and the ambitions of the people that are going to use these spaces in the outcome, in the architecture. And so, you know, we're kind of quite proud in a way of the fact that the projects all look quite different because they're really reflections of the clients and the people that are going to be using them. And so we kind of did that. That was quite an intuitive process, but later on in the practice, we kind of formalized it in the briefing game. Yes, here we go. Good. I'm glad that's the next slide. So when we kind of wanted to make this process of co-designing and kind of collaborating something more formal, something that not only we would do, but everyone who works with us and for us could pick up and implement in the same way to get a similar outcome. So we developed the idea of a briefing game.
Also, I think it helped because a lot of our clients didn't know architecture, they didn't know the process, so it was a way of getting them on board in an informal way. Also, they had kids, or maybe they didn't speak English, and so it was, or English wasn't their first language, so it made it fun and a playful way for them to feel empowered to have a conversation about design.
Yeah, so to explain it a little bit, we kind of look at how they're living in the house or how they're living not in that house yet, but we're kind of quite interested in the day-to-day life, and you know, I think it's something that we find, you know, it can on the surface appear banal, but actually it's all these little moments add up to something quite significant in the way that people live, and I think we like talking about that. And so we talk about everyday experience, we talk about special occasions, we talk about the future, what that might look like, and scenarios. So we're trying to make a brief that is kind of robust and adaptable and flexible for any changes that the household might come across. So we kind of have like cards that are like activities, like what do you do where and when, and then we have cards that are sort of qualities of space. Is it dark, is it light, is it cozy, is it drafty? And it's also, you know, there's no fixed outcome. Everyone plays with it differently. Some people are like really standoffish and that we have to kind of move the cards around for them. And other people love it and they get really involved. And there's not really a set outcome, but it's more a process of getting to know them and getting to know what they want to get from the project. I think it's actually been really successful in terms of getting more consistent consensus. So, you know, before this, you quite often go back and you talk to the clients, you go away, do a design, and you come back, and then you'd be like, here's our design, and they'd say, oh, you know, that wasn't quite what I meant or wanted. I think this process kind of creates a consensus before you've even started doing anything. And so, as well as being something that I think is quite fun and quite interesting in terms of how the process works, it's also quite smart because it means that there's less wasted work and we're more likely to kind of have an outcome that everyone's happy with.
This led us on to Cork House. We worked with a family. They had 2 kids. They'd bought this sort of 2-bed house. It had no connection to the garden. It also had a massive level change from the inside to the back. It was about 1 metre difference. They were lovely because they already had loads of ideas of how they wanted to live, but the house just wasn't right for that. And we proposed, through the briefing game, we worked out, well, actually, what they want is they want to be together, but they want to be having separate activities within being together. So the kids might want to do their homework while the mum's cooking, while the dad's reading or something, but they want to be able to do that together, but have their own nooks. And so we created a series of levels as you walk through the house, and each level had a different activity. So in the middle, you had the kitchen, and then you stepped down, there was a utility area, then you stepped down, there was a dining area, and then you step down and there's a living, and then you've got the garden beyond. We also thought about how you might feel within that space, and although it was open, we wanted to make it feel quite intimate, and we didn't want it to be loud and echoey. So we were thinking about materials. We wanted to fit in with the existing London stock brick, but something soft and uninterrupted and textured. And we ended up going with cork. And I think we chose it because it had a lovely texture. It was also a sustainable material. It was also fully compostable, and it could be left untreated. So we could use it as a rain screen because it's completely waterproof. We could use it internally for insulation. And again, we didn't need to clad it internally. We could just leave it exposed. We then sort of put together a material palette where we were looking at the different types of materials that we might use, thinking about the open plan nature of the space, and also making it feel warm and intimate. So this was the palette. We worked with a builder that we've worked with before, and he'd never worked with cork before and thought we were completely crazy. But he got on board with it, and he loved it because it's a really easy material to cut on site. You bond it. It's relatively, quick to get delivered. It comes from Wales. It's delivered, and then it's pretty quick to put up. So actually, he was a massive convert. But I think the reason we have this slide in here is to show that it is a collaborative process. The whole thing is collaborative. So we worked with structural engineers that provided kind of solutions that would work with the scheme, but also our design and what we were trying to do. And we worked with the builder to help us sort of realise that. And the clients as well were fully invested and fully on board, which was a really lovely thing.
But I think the crucial thing is that it was easy. Like, it's simple. You just bond 100 mil of cork onto the front and back of a block, and that does what you need. So I guess the story is about how do you do this kind of stuff at this scale? You're not going to be getting in a specialist subcontractor. You're not going to be able to do complex detailing. So you need to keep things simple. And so that's what we had to do here. And actually, it's been really robust. It's aged really well. The project's sort of 8 years old now. So it was a very simple but robust solution.
The nice thing about it is as well, I think the clients went on board with all the kind of properties I told you about. Oh, uh-oh. Oh. I'll keep talking anyway, but what I was going to say was the clients really they went along with the material because we were so excited about it and for all its sustainable properties, and they really liked that. But the nicest thing was that I think it was the unexpected joy that the material brought them. So they talked about having 21 people for Christmas, and they said it was great because actually the acoustics within the cork space made that environment not feel crazy loud or crazy intense. It actually absorbs a lot of the sound. They also talk about how like the mum loves being at the top cooking, she almost feels like the captain of a ship because all the other levels are below her and she's kind of steering this ship. And it's those sorts of moments that are really, for us, the lovely part. Like, they often post on Instagram their like birthday photos or how they dress the space up for Christmas. And that always makes us really proud that they're kind of taking ownership of it and making it their own and celebrating it in their own way. I think the husband loves going up and sniffing it as well because it smells a bit charred, and so he always, he just gets obsessed about it.
The next project is like a competition that we won in the middle of lockdown or beginning of lockdown, and it's in the Becontree Estate. Does anyone know the Becontree Estate? Yeah. It's in Barking and Dagenham. It's the largest council estate by area in Europe, although it's not really a council estate anymore because there's only 25% of the homes are still social rent. It's very. Can I have the clicker? So it's very big. It's 50% of the area of Barking and Dagenham. It's very big. It looks a bit like this. So you've got kind of typical 1920s garden city inspired houses, these big wide roads, and the original design had all these kind of like green corners. So everyone was kind of moved out of East London, given a home in what was then kind of quite rural Essex, and there's all these kind of green spaces that are left over. They typically now have a big fence around them that so you can't get onto them, and they have a sign saying no ball games. No ball games, and a lot of the streets have been kind of. There was previously quite a kind of rich horticultural culture of kind of garden, like showing off your front garden. In fact, you could win a month's rent in if you had the best front garden in the estate. So, I mean, put that in context of now, that's quite a lot of money. And
There was a lot of pride.
There was a lot of pride. The competition was to reimagine the green spaces that existed, which are something like 1,000 of these, of different types, different sizes across this quite vast estate. So our idea was to create a master plan, really, that would prompt an idea of all of these spaces having a meaning. They could be places for rest, places to grow, in whatever way you want to interpret these things, to play or to meet. And in the future, our suggestion was that you'd have a series of routes through the estate, and all the green spaces would kind of fit with one of these activities or interpretations. This was a kind of competition visual that we created. And what we wanted to do was to bring some of the spaces that kind of formed around junctions into a kind of square. The estate has a real kind of car problem, and there's quite a lot of antisocial driving. And so what we wanted to suggest was a kind of reclaiming of those spaces by the people that live there. So this is not what we did, but this is the idea, is that we're kind of re-greening, rewilding some of the spaces, inviting people to play on it, to meet on it, to grow, to come together, that's what. And so we got.
There was also an element of reuse in it. So there was also an element of making and reuse. So we did a huge amount of engagement for this project. So we engaged with local primary kids, elderly groups. There's a sort of art centre. There was a huge amount of engagement, local residents. We had a lot of sessions, and we tried to feed back and distill that engagement into the proposals. I think this was the project that showed us so much the power of engagement and how actually getting people on board and can almost enhance and allow this architecture to succeed. As part of this, alongside, we were also looking at reuse and thinking about materials that were on site or that were readily available, that we could then make into moments that would create the rest, the grow, the meet, the play. So
we've delivered one of the 3 sites that we kind of took forward, and so there was a lot of reuse, and it's an enormous amount of work actually, and that's one of the things that we may need to think about in the future if there's of a circular economy. How do we make these things a little bit easier to make happen? We got given some crankshafts. You see the blue things in the concrete at the top from the Ford factory, which was based at the southern part of Barking and Dagenham. And we wanted to incorporate them into some sort of kind of public sculpture. So we created this kind of angled triangle with the crankshafts embedded into it. And then we also were able to get hold of these bits of granite, which are taken from the river wall, the Thames river wall, where they were building the new super sewer. So these are from the original Bazalgette's, I never know how to pronounce that, his original sewer, Victorian sewer, and the embankment. And then they were brought here, and so they're kind of arranged as a sort of informal play structures, but also crucially kind of shielding these spaces from the road and giving that sense of security and safety for children. You can't see it here, but we also got, oh, you can actually, there's sort of felled trees from the kind of council maintenance team placed along the edge as well. And we chose this site because there's no green space in the whole ward. There's no play space in the whole ward, and it's on the route to 2 schools. So the idea, and you can sort of see the reality, is that it's a real space for play. It's not formally a space for play, but it's a space where kids will interact with, and children will interact with these objects. And there's also a kind of nod to the horticultural tradition of Becontree with this kind of trellis and the kind of roses there. And that's the planting day, which was quite a fun thing that we did with all the residents and our team as well. There's a sort of tableau of it with our kids as well. So yeah, that was Becontree. And I'm going to talk about Ledbury as well. So Nimi, you're going to have to wait a bit more before you can talk again. Ledbury Estate. So this was another competition that we won as part of a team with Karakusevich Carson and Office Sian and Studio Gill. This is Ledbury Estate, which is just off the Old Kent Road, and the Old Kent Road is just off screen at the top. The project was to replace this. You can see the tower at the bottom, and so we have here we go, tower, and then there's 2 towers. There's 3 towers up here. All of them have been condemned because they've got hazardous materials, and they're panelized, a panelized tower. The project team was chosen, led by KCA, to replace the 3 towers with the same number of affordable units plus, I think, 50 or so market units to cross-subsidise for Southwark Council. We collaborated on the kind of master plan, and then we were asked to lead the design of the public realm in the first phase of the project, which is on this site. This is a park. As I said, Old Kent Road's up here, and the larger part of the site is up here, but that won't get built for another 6 years or something mad. So this is our proposal. We wanted to create, I don't know, haven't got a plan in here, Nimi?
No.
No, okay. So they're building sort of, there's a block here, some maisonettes here, and then a sort of larger tower here, about 14 stories. What we wanted to do was create a kind of street, because at the moment there's no street, there's just this kind of vast bit of concrete and then a bit in front of the shops over here. We wanted to create a street and a sense of a kind of meaningful public realm. And there's also going to be a new play space at the back in the space left between the buildings, connecting into an existing courtyard. So this is the street. We've included some rain gardens, because it's a place where there's localized surface water flooding. We've created a kind of play space at the back that connects into this existing courtyard, and that was really important. We did 2 engagement sessions, one with kind of children on the existing estate, and one with young adults in the nearby area. The one with the young adults was really interesting because especially the young women really wanted somewhere safe to meet and come together that was crucially well lit and overlooked. So we wanted to create a space on the corner, and that's sort of in that location there, opposite the park, opposite the shops, where they could meet and feel safe. So we kind of created this kind of bench with kind of planted beds around it. There's lots of good lighting. It's quite well overlooked. It's very it's very difficult to get local authorities, whether they're clients or they're approving it, to get behind anything like this because they're kind of worried about antisocial behaviour. They're worried about people sleeping on the benches, all sorts of things like that. So, but actually by kind of evidencing the kind of feedback that we had from those young adults, that we were able to advocate for this as part of the project. So it's really exciting that that's happening. This is the play space at the back. It's very much kind of trying to create something. We kind of lent a bit on the feedback from the residents, but also on our own experience as being parents. I kind of find it really frustrating that you have playgrounds with a fence around it, and the adults will have to sit and watch the children play, and then everywhere else the kids can't play. It seems like a kind of strange, like hard barrier between if you're a child you can play, but you can only play here, and if you're an adult you can't play in there. So what we wanted to create was a space where everyone sort of felt comfortable. So we've got kind of little bollards which kids can jump on, but also adults can sit on and kind of have a conversation. Same with these kind of steps with cutouts, so people can kind of, maybe older adults, older children can kind of sit together and talk. But yeah, we wanted to create a space for everyone, a play space for everyone, and so that's what we've done there. And it's also crucially kind of very connected to the existing courtyard space, although they kind of showed a metal barrier in there, but that's not going to be there. And that was also crucial to kind of get that sense of the existing and new communities coming together. And this is it on site, so it's exciting. And so that's the kind of play, so we should have included a plan, but that's the play space there, and these are the kind of buildings as they're forming. Yep, makers.
I guess through all of our projects, there's a running theme that we like to get really hands-on because we can get hands-on. So we like an element of making in our projects. I think it's another way to get clients collaborating with us and empowered to take part in the building process. I think a lot of people can often be like, I'm an architect, I'm not a builder, but actually as soon as you start getting involved in the making and you start talking to the people that make them, they love it. They love that you come down. Like these were our clients. They went down and placed the marble in their worktop. We get involved in kind of designing unique bits of furniture. So this was a really small site, a really condensed program, and we kind of made these beds that had wardrobes underneath them, which allowed these small spaces to be inhabited by their children. We get involved in kind of pull-down beds, so you can have like, it can be a dressing room, and then you can pull it down, and it can be a bed when you need it to be. This was Curve Appeal project. We worked with a furniture designer. The architecture was the furniture. So the walls were actually seen to be almost like bookcase walls. They would be interactive bits of furniture. And we got involved with a furniture maker. We tested things out, like we had curves put in, so we tested out routing them, the width of them, the material, how we'd create kind of internal windows to make something that was structurally sound. It still performed to the needs of the client, but also it was playful and fun. Sometimes we do a lot of work with concrete. We were working with a concrete supplier, looking at kind of coloured concrete. We went down to their workshop to see how they do it, talk about what's involved in setting a concrete worktop out, what's available. they sort of lent their advice to us, and we were able to kind of produce things, one-off pieces that I think they were really proud of, as well as us. This is more later projects where we're looking at bespoke flooring. We talked, like a lot of the time the ideas are rooted in design, and it might be rooted in the concept, which might be rooted back to the briefing game. But how do you deliver that in a cost-effective way for our clients? So this looked at creating this kind of flooring which resembled cobbles, like you would see in a piazza or outside. How do you get that outside feeling inside, but how do you do it for not too much cost? And it was about setting out all of these tiles so that they were seamless, and they kind of gave this feeling of almost like a Scarpa-esque flooring. Again, this was testing out using hemp for our hemp house project, which we'll come on to. And the contractor sort of mocked up these sample boards, sample kind of test panels, so we could test the finishes that we wanted to apply on the cork. Also, it kind of managed the appearance so that the clients had an expectation that was realistic. That's the hemp.
Yeah, I guess what we've tried to do is kind of we started off doing lots of small projects, and we wanted to, I guess, create a narrative around those and a narrative about how we wanted to work that would allow us to scale up. And so you've already seen some of the kind of larger projects that we've done. And I think it's about kind of talking about things in a bigger way. And so when we started talking about our ambition to, or kind of approach to design together and to kind of to reflect the character of the users within the final building or the final spaces, then it started to allow us to kind of have a bigger voice and then get different opportunities. So these are some of the things that it kind of led to. I did my talk at the RIBA last week about about architecture pay, and that's value, and pay, and that's been interesting. We're going to hopefully follow that up with the RBA. There's something we're going to be speaking to the council about that, see what they can do about it. We've been doing an interesting project in Peckham with DRMM and Jazz Bala, and I kind of keep on writing and thinking about things. So I wrote something about architecture after Grenfell, and that's led to some interesting conversations and reflections about ethics and architects' role after Grenfell.
Funnily enough, that piece was written about 4 years ago, and I think a number of what we were saying there was that actually architects have an ethical responsibility. And following that article, we decided to stop specifying PIR insulation or highly flammable insulation. And subsequently, I think basically that was the outcome from a lot of our architects actually, and more have joined to do that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the government have said they're not going to allow from the suppliers that were part of the Grenfell inquiry, they wouldn't be allowed to supply to public projects. We've also been appointed, if you go back to the ANU framework, London framework, which was great, except we haven't got any work from it yet. But we're hoping that we've got our fingers crossed that something will come of that. So I guess like the next thing that we kind of were thinking about. So we've been thinking about architecture in the climate crisis. How do we respond to it? But also more broadly, like how does it change how we judge and how we design buildings? So we wrote a bit about that, how I think our judgment needs to shift from a sort of aesthetic one to something richer around obviously carbon, also the kind of how much are we reusing, how much can we kind of reinvent and invigorate existing spaces and existing materials. And so it sort of starts with that, and then I think that helps us define what we want to do with our projects and what we want to talk about with clients. So it's kind of nice to reflect that actually you can be quite purposeful if you write something like that about thinking about, okay, what is architecture, how should architecture be in the climate crisis? It kind of forces you to start to reflect on that and on the work that you're doing. And then that kind of leads us on to a couple of projects.
Yeah, I guess these are some of the more recent projects that we've done, and you've sort of seen some of the imagery earlier. But I think we're now, as a practice, trying to think about, well, actually, how do we do retrofit? How do we work with these existing buildings sensitively? How do we manage kind of climate within them? You know, it's not about putting loads of glass on them and overheating, etc. How do we do that responsibly? And this was a project for a house in North London. They sort of wanted us to look at potentially doing something at the back, and we ended up only infilling and sort of reworking the existing, being mindful of the existing openings, touching the existing really lightly, and sort of, but still creating a maximum impact. So they ran supper clubs, and they could have 4 of them for dinner, or they could have 22 of them, and how they allowed for that flexibility. And I think a lot of families, or a lot of people that own properties, want that adaptability and flexibility. But how do you do that when you're just giving people what they really need, but sort of making it, you haven't got the space all the time, it's only on occasion. And so actually we sort of said, well, there's no point building for the 22 people when you've only got them once in a while. Why don't you just say, well, on those days we'll allow that space to bleed out. So it'll bleed out in the garden, and it'll bleed out into the internal spaces. It'll sort of, almost like a parasite, just sort of take over. And then when it's gone, it sort of retracts. And I think having that clear idea about telling them you don't actually need the space, you just need it on occasion, and actually maybe think about that, and think about sort of, it's much more cost effective to do it that way, work with what you've got. So we kept the existing kitchen, and we kept the existing openings, we cleaned up the existing brickwork, and we lightly touched the new space, lightly touched the existing, with this feeling of kind of an external space. So it felt like an external space, and when they needed for it to bleed and move out into the garden, it could do so seamlessly on those occasions. Hemp House was another one where we were looking at using hemp as an insulation. The original idea was to expose it externally as well as internally. So we had a kind of polycarbonate on the external, so you would see through to the hemp both internally and externally, but we came with some resistance from the planners, so we had to put a sort of clay render on the back. But again, like Cork House, it was a really simple construction. It was the hemp. The only kind of complexity was how we would construct it, because obviously it's quite temperature sensitive. So we needed to think about how a builder could construct it in our climate where it's a bit unpredictable, and the curing time, the drying time for it. But the builder, like I said, got on board with it. He did loads of mock samples. We worked with the clients to look at materiality, and yeah, this is where we were testing the finish of the hemp. And the clients, again, like with Cork House, they really love it. The temperature inside that space is constant. And also, it's really good for sound. It's completely peaceful in there. And I think the clients had kind of, again, gone with us on this journey of using the hemp, and then were surprised, actually, by how much they loved it. I think they've decided to keep, like, the walls free just because they love the look of it and they like the texture of it, which is really nice to hear. The last project I'm going to talk about is Sayes Court. It's another kind of landscape public realm project that we're doing. We won the competition. It's with the National Trust and Lewisham Council. And again, it kind of built on our work that we were doing at Becontree, but also we've been able to put some of the other lessons that we've learned along the way. It looks at a number of the green spaces within the Sayes Court estate. We looked at the estate and we looked at these green spaces and we kind of grouped them into 3 types. We said, well, some are like public squares, some are big and they're like, they could become city parks, and some are really small and actually they're so close to the people's flats that they're actually treated more like back gardens. We again got involved with engagement, held events for the local residents to come out, made a giant picnic blanket with the estate printed on it, and got them to interact with it and tell us what they wanted from these green spaces and which ones they wanted to be developed. So these are the three that they chose. So the top left is a park, the one in the middle is a city square, and the one on the bottom is a back garden. And we're working with the residents to try and develop some concepts for these. So the park has a lot of mature trees already in that green space, and so what we're imagining is something really light touch. We're creating a play route through that space, but treating it more like a forest floor. So we're having lots of natural play, having moments for people to sit. There aren't any benches on the whole estate, so nobody can kind of sit down. So we're trying to push for some benches, seesaws, and also trying to work with suds so that we're getting some sustainable drainage as well. On the sort of city square, we're seeing that more as a sort of sociable space. So we're trying to encourage people to come and sit and eat for a picnic or have a children's party there. We've got ping pong, we've got pull-up bars, we've got a stage or a platform. And on the bottom side, that's the back garden, and that's more of a kind of intimate space. We've got raised planters talking about growing, allotments. We've got also, again, a sociable space, and we've got a kind of central play feature for under sevens, a sort of sand pit. But I guess this project has been really lovely because we're trying to do something that I think we're really interested in, which is upgrading spaces, making them better for the people that use them, and trying to do that in a really sensitive, budget-conscious way.
Could you go back a slide? I think what's interesting is that there's so many spaces like this across London and across the country, and they've got so much potential, especially spaces like this which exist in a context where very few people have access to their own garden, and so there's such an enormous social impact you can have. And actually, you don't have to do that much. I think like the concept behind the Beacon Tree project was not that we'd have a sculpture, like 3 sculptures in each space, but more that you would kind of allow people to take ownership of it, and in quite a natural way, people could kind of start to use it to grow things or kind of meet. More inviting the community to kind of take ownership of it and re-inhabit it. The problem you have with spaces like this is that the negative voices tend to always win out, because if one person complains about antisocial behaviour, no one's telling councils or decision makers about the 20 times that someone had a nice picnic or played a game or had a rest. So it's a really, I think it's a really interesting, typology to be involved with. It's very difficult to get decisions made. It's very difficult to get things kind of agreed.
But I think that's where the power of engagement can really make a successful project.
The only way to make it happen is by getting the voice of the people who will use it, and being able to then kind of present that to the people who make decisions about those spaces. And so that's what we're doing here. And using the voices, and I think this is something that we've always tried to do in all of our work, using those voices of the people who will use it to create a narrative that we can then take to the people who might make decisions about it, but also we can talk about it in spaces like this. So I think that's something we've always been kind of really interested in. And yeah. And that's it, I think, isn't it?
This is us. Thank you. Yeah, please ask some questions. All questions, stupid questions, the lot. Do you...
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just to be honest, I myself follow your practice for quite long, and I always show your drawings to my students, and I think that's one of the best practice in the UK, to use drawing to show public space, especially But it's not only that, you also show internal space by especially a lot of isometric drawing. And I just wonder, my question is, you are doing a lot of spatial zoning somehow in public project. Can you tell us a little bit about your methodology? Because we got a lot of issue in the university of students are focused on the building, not the immediate like surrounding of it, but the site is not only a building, the site is a site. Can you tell us a little bit about the methodology?
I think that's where having a briefing game or thinking outside the box helps. I think a lot. I mean, and this happens. I just was on a panel earlier today, and I saw Adam Khan present a scheme, and it just did the scheme in the red line boundary. And there's opportunities everywhere around it, alongside it. And I think if you start to get too into sorting out a problem too quickly, you forget to step back and actually play with it and actually think about, well, what are our ideas here? And then you can say, well, actually, does that design meet that original idea? Is there a narrative? I think because we start off with the ideas and we build the narrative towards the design, it's really strong. And actually then the argument for it being about more than just the building is seamless. People understand that. Did you?
Thank you for a beautiful and inspiring presentation. I was just wondering, you showed a lot of play spaces, and in my student work I've been doing a lot of these, very inspired by Aldo van Eyck and all those schemes. And I always get the feedback from tutors that, oh, these will never get built because people are scared of having concrete in spaces for children, etc. I was wondering if you ever had difficulties maybe getting these approved or regulations about children's spaces, and if you could talk a bit about that.
Is that Sean? He used to be my old tutor. I used to be with you and Kester. In fact,
I can't see who you are.
yeah, but this was 20 years ago. You probably can't even remember who I am. You have to come in now. Yeah, you have to come in now.
Sean's responsible for this.
I'm going to go to the front. Hello, of course I remember you.
Before you came in, we just got asked a question about children's play spaces. Yeah, it's actually quite, it's kind of unbelievable, it's unbelievably difficult and complicated. And the reason actually that you do have a fence around play spaces is because if you identify something that children can play on, then there's a whole new kind of level of insurance that needs to be applied to it, and it comes on a whole new kind of like levels of compliance and accreditation. It has to be reviewed by ROSPA, the Royal Play Association, and so if you have something that's not in a playground, you definitely can't say that it's got anything to do with play. So it's like, that's why they're not play, they're nothing, you can't, officially they're not spaces or things to play on. And it's really complicated. I understand there's some issues with the Muff Play Street because it's not in a playground. And so you kind of come up with this ambition to kind of create playful spaces and create spaces, that aren't kind of, invite play from adults and children. You butt up against all of these kind of very serious issues about insurance and liability that get a bit scary. But
that's why I think you need people on board. Like, you need people who believe in the design and they will advocate for it. And then everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, and then you can get things through. But it is hard, yeah.
No, I was just wondering about the concrete structures you had. Were there ever situations where you had to pretend that they were not meant to be played on, or things like that, perhaps?
Yeah, 100%. They're not play structures at all.
Okay.
And like the council were even thinking about putting a plaque on it that says like, "Do not play on this." But we managed to agree that it's a public sculpture. It's like so. But I mean, you know, just between you guys and us, it's very much meant to be something that's played on, and is, I think, whenever you can see it.
With the Says Court project, those are actually play spaces, and so we're working with Timber Play and various people to talk about surfaces that are underneath it, and yeah, so that's we're going through the proper channels. Those will be play spaces done properly.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So thank you for the lecture. I really enjoyed it, and it was great to see some inspiring projects. Following up on the previous question about making play spaces, so you had mentioned that like officially designating it as a play function comes with a lot of additional regulations, insurances, etc. I'm just wondering what would your opinion be about like having those additional restrictions? Do you think it's quite like a fair safety measure, or do you think it's potentially like hindering the development of spaces in that regard?
I think you have to take it really seriously, and actually there's a really good artist designer called Mike Hewson from New Zealand, and he does these incredible play spaces for children that are kind of wildly imaginative, and also that would appear incredibly dangerous, but he's got a kind of really interesting narrative around risk, and he's done a lot of kind of thought about how actually risk in children's play is really important. The problem is that, you know, you can't talk to the person who runs an insurance company to describe this. So, you know, it takes quite a lot to challenge these things, and I guess we're sort of, you know, we're kind of learning a lot of this stuff. But yes, when it is a play thing, it's good, it's right, and it's good and it's right that it goes through all these kind of proper tests. And I think it's also just good and right that you think about it when you're designing it.
Yes. Thank you. What was the name of the artist again?
Mike
Mike.
Hewson, Hewson.
Thank you.
Could you talk about the project that you're doing in Peckham?
I can talk about it. That has been a baptism of fire. That's how I'm describing that whole project. It was for Berkeley Homes.
But it's being recorded.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's gone in for planning now, so it's public. It's housing redevelopment of existing Morrisons with a massive car park. So there is no building on the site other than the low-rise Morrisons. And it's to develop, I think, about 280 houses. We won the competition. 850. Ledbury's 200, sorry, 850. And we won the competition with DRMM and Jazz Bala. And again, a lot of community engagement was done. Berkeley, this is the second scheme that Berkeley are putting forward. They've already tried to develop on the site, and it got rejected because the community had an action group against it. Oh, well, they withdrew it. But it didn't happen because of the community. So it's quite a sensitive scheme, and we'll see.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because I think Peckham has a really passionate group of active residents, and so there's been a lot of engagement with them. And you know, we're only a small part of the process. We were designing one building of 20 units and some commercial at ground floor, and we tried to bring as much of our kind of spirit of what we've done before into that project by, you know, trying to understand as much as we could about the community and as much as we could about the place. I think Peckham's lucky to have people who fight so passionately for it, and it's such a big scheme that there's so much behind the need to kind of create those homes on it, and there's such a big story behind it that's kind of way above our pay grade. So it's interesting to be part of the project. We tried to do what we could to make it as good as it could be, and I think that's what people have done that. And we completely understand and respect and are amazed by the passion that the people in Peckham bring to it. So yeah, it's been very interesting to be part of.
Yeah, no, the only reason why I brought it up is because I go to Forza Wine a lot. I don't know if you guys... Yeah, so a lot of people are like, oh, this new development's going to like disrupt like the viewing and stuff, and a lot of people are against it. So yeah, we'll see what the...
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, those views are quite new ones. I mean, like the view from Frank's Cafe is only 15 years old or something, and the view from Forza Wine is like 5 years old. So these aren't new. These aren't historic views that have existed for a very long time. But not to say that I think. Yeah, I think there's lots of different viewpoints on it. I don't know if that view will be ruined. I think it will just be different.
The only other thing I was going to say was that the council designated that land for development and saw an opportunity for housing. So I think there's a lot of attack about who's going to deliver the housing, but ultimately the council have seen that area and said that is an area of opportunity, and they need to provide a certain number of housing as part of their, legislation. Or, yeah.
It's really interesting to see. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for your presentation. Really inspired by your hempcrete use, and just wanting to ask, what's your views on the use of hempcrete moving forward instead of concrete? And maybe with the project you did, was there any constraints that you had to, pull through on the hempcrete project?
I forgot to mention, so the contractor who did it, it was the first time he'd used hemp ever. And so he read the book from cover to cover like we did. And after I went for a defects meeting at that project, and he said he's got 2 to 3 other projects all using hemp now. There's so many more clients and so many architects who are specifying hemp. It's becoming much really popular as a material, especially for domestic projects. The biggest issue we had was timings. You have to get the hemp in when the weather is good so that the drying time is quick. And we ended up changing the construction to more like, we had like blocks. So we had shuttering, and then we'd sort of push the hemp in, and it gradually would get higher, and then you'd take the shuttering away and you had the wall. But on the front, I think we did a sprayed hemp. So it was a mixture of 2 different applications of hemp. But the Hempcrete Limited, I think it's Hempcrete Limited, are amazingly helpful. They did video tutorials. They were readily available with advice, and they've been really helpful.
There's been some interesting projects around expanded use of hemp, because it's an amazing product in that it's carbon negative. I don't even know which way around you're supposed to say it, but it sequesters carbon in its manufacture or the growing of the hemp, and it can do quite a lot of things, and it creates very kind of very healthy spaces. The issue obviously is scale, and so if they're going to scale it up, it's going to require land to grow all of the hemp. And so I think Material Cultures did quite an interesting study about what the land might look like if we kind of expanded the hemp industry, and even looked at kind of the landscape proposals of kind of hemp farming and kind of biodiverse farming practices. So there's some interesting things that have been done on. Obviously, a bit like building in timber. If we all started building in timber tomorrow, there wouldn't be enough wood to do it. So there's got to be quite sort of systemic and kind of fundamental shifts in lots of other things for it to come up to the scale of concrete. And there's some things that it can't do. That it can't do everything that concrete does. But I think it's what we're really proud of. I think is showing that it can be done on a small scale, and I think homeowners are especially passionate about trying to build healthily and sustainably, and to be able to demonstrate that you can do that, I think we're really pleased about.
Well, look, thank you both so much. That was really excellent talk, and so nice to see. Yeah, wonderful drawings, but and also there's a couple of some really good technical drawings in there. So it was a great technical lecture as well, and your use of materials in the housing projects as well as the landscape stuff was excellent and great to see. And so, yeah, good luck with all the future projects and battles with residents or conversations. You're very positive about it, and yeah, thanks again. It was fantastic. Thank you.